Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second episode of the JoyPad podcast, where we just talk about things that we enjoy in video games. In theory, occasionally we might get into some complaints, but here's the thing, they come from a place of love, and that's what's important. I am referred to as Mr. Pinto on this podcast because there's two mics, as we established last week. And would my other esteemed hosts please introduce themselves? Tom, why don't you go first?
My name's Tom. I love video games, as many of you probably do as well. Right now, I am hotly anticipating the Final Fantasy VII Remake, and have been playing a couple other things with several of my other co-hosts here. Now I'm going to throw it to Mr. Fleming, as he's already been introduced before.
Hey, I'm Fleming. I like video games, and I like playing and talking about them. And I guess we're talking about what we've been playing recently. So I've been playing a lot of XCOM 2 when not playing with the people on this podcast. So I've been enjoying myself. And Megan, how are you doing?
I'm wonderful. I was not here last time because, I don't really know. I hate video games, and I don't know why I'm here. But yeah, I'm super excited. But in all honesty, I'm a really big fan of games I've played since I was a kid, and I'm currently going back and forth between Death Stranding, because, FedEx and the internet, and Shenmue 3.
I have to ask, and I feel like we've gotten into this on other mediums where we've conversed about such things, but how do you feel about Death Stranding? And I don't mean to be Senor Negative Nancy on the podcast where we're talking about things we love about video games, but
come at me.
I will always come at Death Stranding from a place of I want to love it really hard, so much so that it's like a dying elk in my arms, and I feel like trying to hug it so hard just to bring it back to life. But then Norman Reedus shows up in an AMC ad on a shower in front
I
of
hate
me,
that so much.
drinking a Monster Energy drink.
So I know nothing about Death Stranding. And I was just actually trying to look it up as you guys were talking. What's the game generally speaking about?
That's a very broad
What kind of
question?
game is it?
A walking simulator?
Yes.
Oh, fun.
Yes. Here's my synopsis of the game and why I stopped playing the game.
And Tom, I'm trusting you on this. I feel like you will give a good analysis. Go ahead.
Norman Reedus is a man in a world where COVID-19 has destroyed the planet, and he's the president's son, but he doesn't remember that he's the president's son, and then the president dies, and the president's daughter, who was kidnapped by people on the West Coast, is still alive, and talks to him through the internet, and asks him to walk from the East Coast to the West Coast while dodging ghosts, and he falls over a lot.
Okay. I mean,
Yeah, you're part FedEx delivery guy and Comcast or some other insert internet provider company reconnecting the World Wide Web.
Okay.
Yeah. Except he doesn't actually do line maintenance. He just shows up.
Just based on what you told me, 2 stars.
It's the other way I've seen it referred to and have definitely adopted is that it's a modern age AAA recreation of QWOP.
I've heard that.
That's a PlayStation game, right? It's on PlayStation 4.
Yes, PlayStation 4.
Gotcha.
Mm-hmm.
Hideo Kojima creating a game after Metal Gear Solid and just figuring,
Let's give it a shot.
It's his first big game since leaving Konami.
I think it has great intentions. Like I said, I want to love it so much.
I've heard it described as like you said, Tom, great intentions, beautiful game, wonderfully crafted. They just forgot to put in the fun.
Yeah.
Well, that almost is what we talked about last week with Horizons, New Dawn Horizons. What was the game called?
Horizon Zero
Horizon
Dawn.
Zero Dawn. Thank you.
I still haven't played that yet either. It's right here. Megan actually got it for me for my birthday or something.
Yeah.
I'm just really bad at playing new games.
Yeah.
So I think that's a matter of personal preference, because I actually have friends who just started playing Horizon Zero Dawn and they have loved it so far, and I'm very happy for them that they love it. It's my own fault that I don't fully embrace that game in some ways.
But anyway, I actually wanted, Pinto, you didn't say what you are playing right now, if you're playing anything new. I did not hear it.
I guess I'm kind of playing something new. Last week I said I'm still working my way through the Kingdom Hearts series.
Mm-hmm.
I recently just completed Chain of Memories, which I was still playing last week.
Mm-hmm.
And I have now moved on to Kingdom Hearts 358/2 Days. I don't know what the title means. I'm not that far into it. I played for like half an hour.
It means nothing.
It means we need a new title.
So, like I said, I played for half an hour, and you can see the air quotes. As far as I can tell, the game is entirely cinematics. So it's like I'm just watching a movie that expands the lore of the universe, which is important if you want to understand what the heck is going on in Kingdom Hearts.
Yeah.
Because the lore in that series is just bonkers. But so far, there's been no actual gameplay, and I don't know if there will be.
So that was a game that was originally a Game Boy game, is that right?
Chain of Memories was. The one I'm currently on, I don't know.
Okay. I know there were just a ton of Game Boy releases, and the content within them is just vastly different from the mainline quote-unquote Kingdom Hearts series. And I put it in quotes because there are 3 mainline Kingdom Hearts games.
And like
roughly 37,000 spin-offs.
But the problem with the spin-offs is they're all important.
Right.
So you need to know what happened in those before you can play Kingdom Hearts 3, which came out like 12 years after Kingdom Hearts 2.
The tough thing for me too is I love the idea of having all of these other games that are relevant, but Kingdom Hearts kills me with its big picture relevance. I guess that should be expected in a world where Donald Duck is a mage and Goofy is a knight with a shield.
What I've taken away from it most, though, so far, and everything I've played, is that the protagonist is my least favorite character yet. Which sucks. Yeah. I like Donald and Goofy more than I like Sora.
Well, you know what? That's sort of a thing, because the Disney characters have established personalities and backstories and character to them. That's sort of old animator adage that, like, if you can tell a character from its silhouette, then you've created a good character. Like, that's Donald Duck and Goofy.
Oh, absolutely.
But Sora is just some kid.
Sora could be Sora or Roxas or Cloud Strife. Or, like, from the silhouette, so, you know.
Sora's generic anime boy.
To that point, you know, you mentioned Cloud and you mentioned other Final Fantasy main characters. A lot of times the main character is not... I would argue most people's preferred character in all the Final Fantasies is typically not the main character. The first character. It's not Cloud and so on. You know, it's not Zidane.
That's
it's not
true.
them. So I think it's typically they're there as like a ground base, if you will. They establish a game, but all the other characters are what truly make it, you know, from all of the various Final Fantasies.
So I love you guys right now because this actually segues into the first topic that I wanted to discuss tonight.
Whoa.
And I can just do a clean segue
Look
directly
at
into
us.
this.
We're amazing. What's the topic, Tom?
One of the things I love about video games that I would love to see more of again is playable main characters in multiples with great fleshed out stories. And when I talk about this, I'm talking about one of my favorite games, Final Fantasy VI, where just about every character that you can play as is a main character. You're not tied down to using one character, though there are specific scenarios where you might follow one character's story and some others are more in the tag-along role. But you don't see the same sort of arrangement as much anymore, where you end up with 20-something characters that all have a really big, important backstory. And I'm conflating that because obviously not every character that you can play as in Final Fantasy VI is as important as the rest. Terra is arguably the main character. Celis is arguably a main character because you begin the game as Terra and then you play a large portion of the second half with Celis being the first person you start as. Every other character that you pick up, Sion has a big backstory. with leaving Doma and with his family being there and what happens to them later on. Edgar and Sabin have a whole backstory about their royal lineage and carrying on Figaro in times of war and what should be done and who should inherit the throne. And then what to do when chaos reigns. Even Shadow, who's really just a hired sword, has a whole depth to him surrounding his real identity and his relation to the other characters and whether or not he's really just a sellsword or if he has a conscience behind him. So I find a lot of that depth and a lot of the breadth of the depth to be something that was really engaging in a game like that, or a game like Wild Arms, which I'm not sure if any of you have played the Wild Arms games. Have you?
No.
Pinto?
Oh yeah, I've played 1, 2, and 4.
1 and 2 were where it's at with the Wild Arms games, and I played 3 and 4, but I don't think I ever played them as far as the other two.
I remember telling you that I played 4, and you were like, I hated it. I hate that game. I don't want to play it. Probably because the protagonist is a 10-year-old boy, and you were like, I just don't want to play as a kid who talks about the power of friendship. I am so sick of that in my games.
I don't remember that at all, but I entirely believe it. So 3 then must have been the one where you play as Virginia, the female gunslinger. And I liked that one. That one was in cel-shaded 3D graphics, which was more of a first for that series. But one of the things I liked about that was, again, it was a more limited cast, but in general, each character had a main story arc, and they were more than just sort of a background character in everyone else's story.
Are you thinking that games in the past 10 years have, maybe 10, I'm making a number up almost, but do you think they've cut down on those side stories? Because I actually think that's true. And I think it's in large part because games have gotten so expensive. Years and years and years ago, we may have seen, and I'll use The Last of Us because we talked about it last time, and I know all 4 of us have played it. You may have seen backstory more on Tommy, for example. But because it's so expensive to design games, I mean, they took years to build it, to make that game, and they took, characters, they had to make these animations to put in the game, cutscenes and everything. They just can't afford it. It's become such a bigger risk. So do you think, or does anyone think, because I would argue that's why we're seeing less of that stuff. If you're not a main character, you're going to be in the main character story. You're not going to be kind of your own little shoot-off. It might not be the best game example, but I think that's why it's happening.
I would definitely agree. I think, and you kind of pulled this out, I think it also tends towards the trend in gaming, which is trying to make things more cinematic.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
So there's, when games first started out, it was really kind of a malleable art form. We really didn't know what to do with it. It, started out as all the weird stuff on Atari and in arcades and whatnot, and then eventually we came to RPGs, which had more sprawling stories that could be kind of all over the place, depending on what you got. But today's RPGs are much more streamlined, and I would argue that the best use of the multiple protagonists and the fleshed out, quote-unquote side characters, at the very least, is probably Mass Effect, which is one of my favorite games.
Oh, I love Mass Effect. Yeah.
There's a specific phrase we're both thinking of right now, which is why I laughed.
Yes.
And to clue the audience in, there is a scene in Mass Effect 2 where if you choose to engage in the romance route with Miranda, she asks if you're still interested, at which point Shepard says, "Oh, I'm definitely interested." Which we, as an inside joke, use to coordinate amongst ourselves quite often. But anyhow, just like the number of characters that there are in that game, the amount of dialogue and character development that there is in that game, and the amount of hours that exist in that game are kind of unparalleled in the same space today. So where you would take another game, the first thing that comes to mind is Destiny, but that's not really a good comparison since Destiny becomes more of a shooter MMO. But, that sort of game, which tries to incorporate RPG elements, doesn't really develop characters beyond the main character so much in the AAA space. And I think it is because they're trying to gear towards the cinematic experience, which ultimately is an experience that kind of fails if it doesn't follow one character due to time constraints. That's a very good point.
Well, I think it gets to the crux of your concern with games where they've been going. I'd love to see, games, and maybe it's the retro gaming has to kind of come back a little bit. So like Stardew Valley, which we've mentioned, has so many side stories and cutscenes for the side stories because they're a lot easier for one guy in that case to develop on his own. So if we see someone who's like, you know what, let's put a game like that back, a 16 or whatever bit style game, and make this vast, almost like never-ending game, or this game that has so many side stories, or with the online nature of gaming at this point, the ability to patch in new side stories and stuff for people. I wonder if we're going to see more games start to do that kind of thing. And as computers and developing games gets easier, we might see people build games that they can publish on Steam, or maybe Switch will open up more. In fact, Switch has a ton of micro game makers at this point who are publishing games and keeping them very reasonably priced, if not very, very cheap, a couple dollars at most, just publishing these games. And that can be a whole side topic of if there's too much of that coming out. But at the same time, you're going to potentially have a game, if it clicks, they might invest in being able to make these great, side story kind of characters and games.
That's a good point, and I didn't mean to cut out your point from earlier regarding the financial impact. I think you're definitely right there too. It's definitely probably cost prohibitive to try and do a AAA following of multiple characters. I think Mass Effect Andromeda is probably the latest attempt to do something like that, and just not really due to issues with the story, but more to do with the graphics and stuff like that. There was a hit to that game, and I think others have run from that model a little bit because of that.
Well, how about like Final Fantasies? I have not played actually many Final Fantasies that are recent. So like Megan, Pinto, have you guys played recent? I think you guys have played recent Final Fantasies. Have they been things where we still see those side stories? Because that probably has cutscenes and cinematic scenes and other things in them. So does that still happen in those kind of games? In those AAA, we know people are going to buy this game, so we're gonna invest in these side stories?
I mean, I feel like, I don't know, Final Fantasy 15, they kind of touch upon the backstory of the other characters, whereas, like, Final Fantasy 15, you have the core 4 bros on their road trip. And they did a lot of DLC content where they explored each character individually, which was very nice. Whereas in the main game, they kind of just focused on Noctis. But yeah.
I have to say that was kind of one of the problems I had with the core game of Final Fantasy 15, because I dropped that game primarily due to having to drive too much and having it not be fun.
You don't like any traveling in games, do you?
No, you know what? I cannot say that because I played Red Dead Redemption 2 like crazy.
Okay. I take it back.
Yeah, but the car and then the battles in 15 was just kind of untenable for me. But that's neither here nor there. Really, the issue I started to run into in 15 was that side missions didn't really develop character. And Prompto kept taking pictures of everything with the same 4 lines every 2 seconds. And I kept saying, why do you want to take a group photo on the side of the road right here? And why does it have no specific purpose?
It gains experience. And also it's a bonding experience for your characters, which is important in the end of the game, which you didn't get to.
Nope. But you can take those things and make them more fun, I guess, is what I'm saying. And you can make them into character development experiences, which is something I didn't get from that game. And I would love it if they took some of what they had intended for like DLC or something like that and said, hey, we're going to inject that into those moments to
I agree.
Get you to learn.
Well, that's a whole other can of worms that has really nothing to do with that game and everything to do with the gaming industry right now. But
very true.
I think over the past couple of years, though, Quantic has done a pretty good job of exploring characters. Yeah. I'm a really big fan of everything that they do.
I think another argument can also be made that just generally what you're talking about, Tom, kind of coincides with the death of RPGs as we've kind of known it over the past couple of years, with the movement away from RPGs and more towards, for a while it was like, you know, the first-person shooter genre, which is still big today, and then Battle Royale. There's no real reason or need for character development because there's no real characters. Whereas if you take a game like a Final Fantasy, and you referred to 6, which is good, but even take 7, where you're always focused on Cloud, but there are moments in the story in the game where it's like, hey, you need to take this character with you because this is their big moment. Like, when you get to the Northern Crater, Tifa is in your party. She needs to be there for this. When you get to Cosmo Canyon, hey, Red 13, he's required to be in your party because this is his big story beat.
And even Yuffie, who's an optional character in Final Fantasy VII, she has a backstory. She has important character development elements that contribute to the story. Same for Vincent, who's also a quote-unquote optional character. But you're absolutely right that that's been missing because the trend in gaming is away from that story. And if there is a trend towards a story, it's focused on the single character cinematic storytelling approach. They want you to get into the headspace of one character instead of many, almost.
But an argument can be made in the other direction. Let me pull out a game that I know some of you have played. Let's talk about Chrono Cross, where there's like 8 zillion characters, and none of them matter.
Yeah.
Very few of them matter, let's be honest. Like, I'm sorry, I have a talking puppy in my party. I have a turnip, a literal turnip.
I don't understand the problem.
Exactly.
I have a voodoo doll who has a big old nail through his body that dances all the time.
And at least 50% of the characters you've mentioned are characters you get at the beginning of the game.
Well, that's why I think those kind of... So, you say too many characters. I don't know how many characters were in Chrono Cross. Any guess at all?
I think 50.
I think
50?
It's like 36. I think 50 is a bit much, but I think there's like 36 playable party members.
That's probably
it might be more.
But like if you think of like Final Fantasy 6,
that was 12.
No, there's more than 12. In 6
it's 12 party members.
No,
it's 16.
Yeah,
16,
I thought there was
sorry.
more. I thought there was
it's
more
16.
than that. So I mean that's still not quite as close as I thought. Then I thought the disparity between those games was a little closer, but yeah, 36 is definitely too much. I would say in an RPG.
There are 45 BT dubs.
Oh my. Okay, so it's just getting worse.
And there's also Suikoden. I can't remember.
Yeah.
They have like
or whatever.
105 playable
number.
Yeah, like over 100 playable
That's
characters.
too much. Absolutely too much. But if you had something with 20 people, that's probably fine. 20 or so, I think is reasonable, especially in a game very long enough where you're going to be able to get through multiple different places, multiple stories, and they all kind of combine together. So sorry, Tom, go ahead.
I'm gonna say two things. One, in Chrono Cross, there are the characters that matter and the characters that are there. And the focus is appropriately on the characters that matter, but the characters that are there do not diminish the experience. They're fun, they're goofy in a lot of cases. Again, I'm going to pull back to what I said in episode 1. They make the game more vibrant, more interesting, and more fun, which ultimately is what matters to me.
I hate fun.
Well, go play Death Stranding more then, Megan. Go on.
That's why I do it.
To diminish all the fun in your life and watch Norman Reedus fall over. I've never heard my wife laugh so hard as when I fall on rocks as Norman Reedus carrying packages.
It's so dumb.
And then the other thing is, I think Suikoden tries to do the same thing. I don't have a whole lot of experience with Suikoden, but I think it's like 105 characters, and a number of them are not playable, but they contribute to your mercenary group or whatever.
No, it's an interesting topic. I hope that we do see games explore side stories more. Like I said, I really do, and I hope that I think it's just challenges that the easy money is in other kinds of games right now. Unfortunately, if you are an RPG developer, you might put millions and millions of dollars in the game thinking it's going to have a good return, just to find out after you made this game, i.e. Final Fantasy like 8, that the reviews are pretty poor, and that it's not a good game, and that you spent millions of dollars and you're not recouping your costs. So you're much more likely to go with something that allows you to get the game out quickly, or get the game out and just know that it's maybe not going to be the best game ever, but it might be an okay game. It might be able to sell enough and kind of recoup your investment. So it's a good topic, and I'm hoping that somebody kind of takes that risk, and that's what I'm saying. Maybe we're going to see those things come back.
Well, thank you all for indulging me on that topic at great length.
Megan, why don't you go next since you weren't here last week?
Oh, great. So let's approach this like school with no preparation whatsoever. Stay in school and study. I was thinking about, well, I mean, I'm not thinking about it. I'm discussing it. Video games that require you to make moral choices.
Oh, God. Telltale has entered the chat.
Yeah, is that why you also brought up Quantic earlier? Because,
yes.
Ooh, baby.
Yeah, like Quantic, Fable, Infamous.
Even Mass Effect.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And I know not many of you have probably played this game, but the Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic MMO, which was done by BioWare.
Yeah.
Yep.
I mean, I played the original KOTORs 1 and 2, which also have the same vibe. So.
And even something where you're not making, you're making choices, and I haven't gotten that far, but like XCOM 2, sometimes I have to make that guy go and hack, the box, because if he doesn't do that, I lose next turn. So I'm going to send him in and hope that he dodges the next shot that, is sent at him, and he doesn't, and he dies. So, okay, he's dead now. So, yeah, what's on your mind with those kind of games?
I think it really adds an interesting spin, and it opens up a different avenue as far as storyline. Depending on how you treat a certain situation, people look at you in a certain way. It determines the outcome of your story, especially because, again, I brought up Quantic earlier with their latest Detroit. You can take the passive route or the more violent approach to your Android uprising, and it can really alter the course of the events in your game.
Yeah, that's one of the things just in general I love about the Quantic games, and we can probably talk entirely about Quantic Dream games on their own at some point, but what I like about those kind of games is I play them as if it were a real world decision instead of a video game decision. And normally that's how you achieve the best results in those games, and I love it because it makes me feel so much more immersed. And it comes back to the morality of the choice, like you said. Like, there's a point in Heavy Rain where you go to investigate a house as the reporter, and you can go into the basement and follow the guy, or you can just leave.
Yep.
And normally video game logic is investigate everything, find everything you can in the place before moving on. But in this case, the best choice is to just leave.
GTFO.
And that is exactly what I did, and it worked out so much better than the other route. So, but in terms of morality, I love those kinds of games. I love because they tug at my heartstrings.
Definitely.
I admittedly have a very hard time picking bad, violent, evil options in games.
Me too, and I was hoping that I was not the only one. I can't do a bad. I feel horrible. With the exception of Fable, I think did any of you ever play Fable?
Fable's just funny if you pick bad options. That's the...
It is,
But
yeah.
I don't know if it's Fable 2 or 3 where you get the dog. And they give you a choice where you can either sacrifice your dog to save millions of people, or sacrifice millions of people and save your dog. And let's be honest, I'm saving the dog.
Your dog's a good boy.
Yeah, he's a good boy. You gotta take care of good boys.
There's about a 50% chance that one of those people's bad, so you carry that out, you're only really sacrificing 500,000 good people and 500,000 bad people, so...
And I get to keep that good boy.
Yeah, and the good boy breaks the balance.
So you loved the all Telltale games, like I joked before, but the Walking Dead series, I know you really liked that one. Which I was surprised at how well that was done.
Yeah.
I recently completed just the entire series, which is very good. But I think there are times, and a few specific examples I can think of in games like this are where it's kind of like a little too heavy-handed with like the whole good or bad choice, or even like Infamous 1 was very heavy-handed. The first choice in Infamous Second Son was, do you want to save your grandmother, or do you want to sell out your entire reservation?
Oh, yeah.
It's like, if anyone has a heart, they're gonna be like, Grandma, no.
Yeah. Who picks sell out the reservation? You know what actually hurt in that, and I just played this part of that game. What really hurt there is it seemed like that choice had no bearing on what happened.
Oh, it does.
It does? All right.
Give it time.
I'm gonna try not to get spoiled on that right now.
But yeah, there are just so many points in certain games, and it's worse when decisions are timed.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I recently played through Detroit with a friend of mine. I would be like, you're making all the choices. Like, I'm just here. I'm the device through which you're playing this game because you're not good at games. But anytime like a choice came up that was timed, she was like, I don't know. And I would have to pause the game and be like, the point of this is that you have to make a choice very quickly. You shouldn't be. I am personally of the opinion that you shouldn't be able to pause the game.
No.
Yeah.
Redo it.
For example, Until Dawn is another very good game in that game that we haven't mentioned. But there's a point where you're playing as one of the guys. There's spoilers everywhere. I'm sorry. You're playing as Chris, and you have to. It's a very Saw situation. Also, literally, because there's a saw. But you have to decide between saving Chris's best friend since childhood, Josh, or his other very good friend, Ashley, who he also wants to take to Bone Town, which is what I was saying. And you have like 15 seconds. Which of them am I going to save? And it has a big implication, of course, on the rest of the game.
Mm-hmm.
And another thing, that I like to do in those games is I'll play them multiple times because there's multiple endings. But what I like to do is play it according to what I would do, me, personally.
Yeah.
And then the second time you play it, you have a much better feel for the characters. So I'm like, well, what would this character probably do? It's not me. I'm not in this person's shoes. Like, what would this person do as a character that's well established?
Well, I remember being a little kid and reading through the Choose Your Own Adventure books. I don't know if you guys ever did, but that's exactly where those games came from. The whole idea of being able to replay it. Like, you have to play it multiple times to like learn the whole story, all the possibilities, and everything. But it just kind of I absolutely love those games. I should play a lot more of them because I really don't play many beyond the Telltale ones.
So I think there's a schism too in these sorts of games where there are moral choices, because I think there's two types, and I think Pinto brought this out somewhat. So you have the Quantic Dream Telltale kind of games where there really are pre-established characters, and you learn more about those characters as the game goes on, and you play as a character with a distinct personality who makes choices that grow the character as time goes on. The other kind of game goes back to that kind of Knights of the Old Republic style, where your character is more of a blank slate, and your moral choices then really build the character up from ground zero. And they make you connect more with the character at that point, though, because you're putting some of yourself into it, and you're also getting something out of it because you feel like the direction you give the character has a repercussion. It has a reverberation in the world beyond just, oh, I'm Mario, I don't talk. It's a really powerful mechanic that can work either way. Gotta love it.
The one thing I don't like about about these kind of choose your own games, though, is when a decision doesn't really impact anything. And even if it's It impacts it, but it doesn't impact it in any kind of long-term thing. So the first Walking Dead game, for example, you have a choice between one character and another character. I'm probably just giving the whole spoiler away, basically. Anyway, people haven't played. But you're choosing between two characters in a store. The person dies in, like, a scene later. You know, and that kind of bothers me. It's like, well, you learn a little bit more about the character. You learn, but they both basically get upset about the other one dying, and then that one gets killed after. So it's kind of like, I just don't like those kind of situations where it really doesn't change much anyway.
In that example, it does and it doesn't. Talking specifically about The Walking Dead, and I know you're talking spoilers, guys, we're talking about Carly and Doug.
Yep.
It changes the story beats a little bit while that character's still alive, but the interesting thing about specifically Telltale's Walking Dead is that decision from The Walking Dead Season 1 gets brought up in The Walking Dead Season 4. If you play all the way through, in the final season, Clementine talks about the choices that you made all the way back in Season 1.
Yeah, but does she talk about it, like, at any degree of length? Or does she just say, for example, there's another time, you know, there's some certain ones that are great, but, like, if she just says, I did this, or this person, I remember this person, that still doesn't necessarily do enough for me.
Yeah. That's a developer cop-out, in my opinion.
Yeah, exactly.
Did any of you ever play through Life is Strange, the first one in particular?
Yes.
I've been intending to for
You
about a
need
year and a half.
Great
But-
game.
Just like the subtle choices that you make, and it's not heavy-handed at all, like it gives you the opportunity to kind of do what you want in whatever particular situation you encounter, but that affects how certain characters react to you later in the game, and it has an impact on whether or not you can save certain characters.
I forgot to water the plant the first day. And I came back the second day, and it had an impact. And I was like, no, what?
I've heard people talk about that. I have heard people talk specifically about watering the plant. I need to play this game.
Every game guide says, water the plant right at the top. It's the first thing they say.
Well, thanks, guys.
All good.
Got it.
Now, Pinta, you were excited about your topic, weren't you?
Oh, I don't get excited about much, but yeah. I mean, it's excitement tempered by a lingering sense of disappointment, and by lingering, I mean, well, I'm going to talk about PT, which, man.
Yeah.
So, I'm sure most of you, if you're listening to this podcast about video games, know about PT, which was released all the way back in 2014. It feels like yesterday.
You know, Mike, you know they made a sequel to PT, right? It's
Was
called
it-
SD.
I'm not going to dignify that response. So, this game called PT suddenly appeared on the PlayStation Network, August 12th, 2014. It was by a studio that no one had heard of, 7780 Studios, and no one knew what it was. It just kind of, just go in, free demo, let's try it. It turns out, after beating the game, which people did very quickly, like way quicker than anyone thought they would, that it was a playable teaser for what was supposed to be a new installment in the Silent Hill series, called Silent Hills, produced by Hideo Kojima of Metal Gear Solid fame, starring Norman Reedus. Guillermo del Toro was involved, and holy crap, like, this was going to be amazing, and then Silent Hills got canceled. But that's not what I'm here to talk about. I'm here to talk about specifically PT, the demo. And I remember that, Megan, you discovered it first. You told me about it, and the first time I played it was at your apartment.
Oh, yeah.
I think it was your old apartment. And you didn't tell me anything about it. You were like, you have to play this.
Yeah, because you would come over and we would play spooky games.
Yeah, and you were. I was like, well, what's going to happen? And you were like, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
So, the way this game works is, I don't know if it's procedurally generated, the term I'm trying to think of. You go through the same loop over and over again. It's just a corridor in a house. You go forward, you turn right, you go all the way down that corridor, you go down the stairs, you open the door, and it opens up back into that same corridor. But the thing is, things change as you play it. Things happen in different orders. Things that you did before in a different playthrough might not happen the next time you play it. Or things that you've never seen before, and this has happened to me because I played it like 6 or 7 times, will happen that you just like, what is this? I've played this so many times and I've never seen this happen before. For a game that is a demo that's like 15 minutes long is one of the spookiest things I've ever played. There's just a sense of dread throughout the entire thing. A big part of it is the sound design.
Yeah.
Where if you play that and listen to it on headphones, and this is like a topic I want to get into at another time, is sound design is so important for games, but especially survival horror games. There's swells of sound that I can't even describe. It's just like swells of ambiance. Go ahead.
Sorry, you know what's funny about this? You said the game name, and I did not recognize it. Now, PSA, I actually don't have a PlayStation 4, so I never, was on the PlayStation Network, never got a chance to play it. But as soon as you mentioned that corridor and how it generates, I recognized it from YouTube videos and the like. Like, that's how big... And the best part about that game, just from the release date, was I got married 2 weeks later. So, like, I even, while doing that, while dealing with all those things, not even having the game, still remember this game and having seen things about it. So this game, like, touched a lot of people's, like, horror chords, for lack of a better description.
Well, you know what's funny is it's not even its connection to Silent Hill that makes it an interesting or good game.
Not at all.
Because you could play it and have no idea that it was related to Silent Hill even a bit. But I think two things make it viable: expectation and deviation. So when you start going through a corridor and it's the same corridor over and over and over again, you start to expect the same thing. And then even if you change just a little thing, when you're in like a horror frame of mind, any little thing that changes scares the crap out of you.
Isn't the first time you go through that game or through that corridor, it's just like a plain old corridor, nothing special about it? It's all
everything's
nice.
totally normal.
And then the next time, like, the phone rings and stuff like that. Is that kind of? I think that's the kind of stuff that happens. The pictures start falling. Yeah.
And that's the thing. Like I said, I myself, I played it like 6 or 7 times. And I've watched so many other playthroughs of it, just because it's different every time. And I like watching people play scary games because watching people get scared is hilarious for some reason.
The kitchen demo.
Well, oh God, yeah, yeah.
Well, I think the funny thing too is there's a lot of cases where procedural generation exists but doesn't work particularly well.
Oh, it works here.
Well, horror seems like such a genre where it would always work very well if done right. Because again, expectation can be set and then subverted. And that's kind of the crux of horror and spookiness and stuff like that. I honestly think that Konami probably missed out on a huge opportunity. Even when they decided to cancel Silent Hills, they could have just taken PT and just kept throwing things into it. Mm-hmm. And you would have had people paying money like for a AAA game just to keep going through the spooky corridor.
Yeah. Or you could do like a single room in the house. Like you can unlock different areas and just focus on that as a different chapter.
Yep.
Yeah.
And they could have kept building on that. Yeah, they could have done, like you walk to the end of the corridor and instead of, you starting again at the start of the corridor, you walk into a room and then they could have made every room different. One time you go into a library that, or one time you go into like a dining area, or you go to a kitchen and then like the kitchen can change or something. That would have been an easy way for them to like, I know we mentioned DLCs, let's avoid that conversation, but they could have sold DLCs like, room DLC, second floor DLC, they could have done that and just procedurally generated more and more content into it. And as long as they kept it reasonable in the length of time to do that, it would have been, they could have done a lot with that. I'm surprised no one picked it up and tried to do their own version of that game yet.
Yes.
Someone out there.
That's the most frustrating thing to me, is that I watch people play scary games all the time. Like, I mean, Markiplier, big YouTuber, he plays scary games all the time. But even with the plethora of scary games that he's played, there's nothing that has followed the template of PT. Everyone knows how monumental just that demo was, and no one's really, like you said, picked up the ball and run with it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Business opportunity.
Yeah, I play scary games all the time. Like, my two genres of choice generally are survival horror and RPGs. So, like, I play a lot of spooky games, and it's baffling to me that I've seen a couple of games that seemed like they were going to do it. Like, I remember Allison Road was an indie game being developed for the PC, but I think that petered out. I haven't heard anything about it in years. But it was supposed to be that kind of thing where...
It had a similar look, similar feel.
Procedurally generated, yeah. But I think the studio that was doing it, I don't know, maybe they went bankrupt, but it's just, it's crazy to me that, you know, obviously PT was made by Konami, a huge, huge publisher who doesn't do anything anymore. But at the time, there's so much tension in that game that's missing from so many horror games.
In only 15 minutes, they gave you that, you know, that kind of impression. That's incredible that they could do something like that.
Next time I visit you, Fleming, I'm gonna bring my PlayStation 4 so you can play.
Oh God. Here's my problem with horror games. I love horror games too. Actually, I played through all of like Outlast, which was played through all of Outlast.
Very good.
2.
Up until like, the last 2% of it.
Yeah, Outlast was very, very good up until, like you said, up until you started having to go through like the lab area. That was that was pushing it. But up until
my wife is playing that game right now.
Oh, well, there you go. We have to get her on as a special
game
guest.
That made Megan scream while
I
I was playing it with her. It was
I usually
hilarious.
don't have that reaction.
It was great.
But, you know, my problem is like, sometimes games are about relaxing for me, but like, just if you want a horror game, and especially if you want to watch someone who has never played the horror game, whether in person or over at YouTube or Twitch or something like that kind of stream, it is so enjoyable to watch other people. And I do like horror games. I just have to be in that mindset, or I can't do it. I just tense up too much.
I understand that. It's the same with watching a scary movie. You have to want to watch a scary movie, you know?
Yeah.
I'm not a good horror game or scary movie person, and the first half of Until Dawn gave me nightmares for one night until I beat it the next day. Because spoiler alert, serial killers are scary to me, but big scary monsters in the mountains are not.
I think the thing with horror games, and that's part of what, you know, Megan and I have literally built our friendship on, is that we get scared, but it's so momentary because we immediately get angry afterwards. Jump, and then we just get mad and we start cursing at the television. And yeah, that's really our reaction.
We rip off our VR headsets and start screaming.
Yeah,
awesome.
That's the thing that happened.
Oh man, we have to have you know, we're recording this in March, but when we get to October, we have to have like a Halloween, not playthrough, but like spooky game stream, something like that. That'd be so much
Spoopy
fun.
episode.
Yep.
But yeah, recently there were rumors that PT or Silent Hills might be being resparked. But right before we started this episode, Megan told me that they were squashed by Konami because Konami are jerks.
You know, there's one thing I thought of while we were discussing the setup of PT that I wanted to talk about, because I think it's kind of similar to the board game Betrayal at the House on Haunted Hill. Is that the full title?
Betrayal at the House on the Hill? Something like that.
House on the Hill, okay. It's a similar idea, and I'm amazed that no one has created a video game adaptation of that. Whether or not it's, you know, AAA, I could care. But if someone were to create a similar adaptation of that, it's a similar experience because you go through the same house but have a different experience every time. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I think people would go in with the expectation of that, which is the only thing that would harm it in contrast. But otherwise, I love the idea of an experience like that in a video game format, and I think it's probably the closest thing we would get as a successor.
There's been a couple, the one challenge about that kind of thing, there's been a couple games I know of that have done either procedurally generated kind of things or like multiplayer horror experience, is that horror is arguably best done when you do it yourself. So if like the four of us could be in something like Betrayal on the House at the Hill, like in a mansion, it sounds like a great game, and it probably would work in some ways, especially if you followed that game's concepts. But if you were trying to do some procedurally generated, just scaring each other kind of, or scaring yourself kind of thing, with the four of you, I don't know how much that would work. But the idea of going into a house instead of just a corridor and having a different experience every time in the house that's procedurally generated sounds really awesome. I would love to see someone put that kind of game out.
Yeah, I think it's definitely an experience best served alone, like without teammates.
Well, yeah, and here's why. If you're in a group, you can kind of rely on the other people, and you feel less alone and therefore less afraid. But if you're on your own, you're on your own.
That's why Megan and I play scary games together. But I like the mention of Betrayal at the House on the Hill, because it shows that we're multi-layered nerds. This is a video game podcast, but hey, we also play board games.
Yeah.
Indeed.
All right, Mr. Fleming, what have you got for us?
So this, I will segue out for just a second. This is getting to be a fairly long podcast, if you guys have noticed. Should we hold discussion of any more topics now, or should I just jump right into my topic?
What do you guys think? And we're back. So, we have decided that in lieu of this podcast getting terribly long, the original goal was to have like a 30-minute podcast, and we're about an hour in. We are going to put Fleming at the start of next episode with his topic, because would you say it's a fairly divisive one?
I would say it's a divisive one, yes.
So be prepared for a hearty debate next time. I don't know if we'll debate it, but it's definitely something that most gamers probably have strong feelings on one way or another.
That's what I'm here for. Controversy, man.
Teasers.
Controversy creates cash. So, we have not yet established social media or anything like that. Shut up, past Mike Pinto, because here's future Mike Pinto to plug those social media channels that you were talking about. I also got a new mic in between the time that this episode was recorded and when I'm recording these plugs, so sorry for the disparity in sound quality. Anyways, social media channels are super easy. Just search for JoyPad Pod everywhere. So if you want us on Facebook, you can find JoyPad Pod. If you want us on Instagram, just search for JoyPad Pod. And if you want us on Twitter, I believe we're JoyPad Pod 1, but our handle is @JoyPadPod. Anyways, back to the past. But eventually, we will ask you to follow us there.
Click that like button. Smash that subscribe button.
Oh, there it is. 3 of us now on this podcast take part in another podcast called The Roll Less Taken, where we play RPG games that aren't Dungeons & Dragons. I don't know what game we'll be playing when this one comes out, so I'm not going to say what it is. But hey, search for The Roll Less Taken wherever you can find podcasts. Roll is spelled R-O-L-E. And give that a listen too if you're into that kind of thing.
I play a maniacal Bob Ross in Season 2.
That sounds wonderful.
And Megan plays a Scottish biker leader with a vice president cat sidekick.
Yeah,
It's
accurate.
Awesome.
And I play everyone else because I'm the MC. So, hey, anyone else have anything to say before we sign off?
No, thanks for listening.
If you're listening, I love you all. Please agree with me.
But not my word.
Validate us.
Till next time.
Bye.
Riding that donkey. I don't know.
Ride that donkey.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.